Sarah, a key figure in the Old Testament, was the wife of Abraham and the mother of Isaac. She remained childless until the age of 90. God promised Abraham that she would become a mother of nations, Genesis 17 verse 16, and bear a son, but Sarah struggled to believe this. Isaac, born to Sarah and Abraham in their later years, was the fulfillment of God's promise. Sarah's earlier infertility, mentioned in Genesis 11 verse 30, contrasts with the overarching theme of the Abraham narrative, God's promise to make him the father of a great nation. While Sarah represents fear and doubt, Abraham symbolizes faith and hope. Her skepticism led her to find her own solution, offering her servant Hagar to Abraham so that Hagar might bear a child for them. When the promise was reiterated, Sarah responded with cynical laughter, Genesis 18 verse 12. Yet, when the promise was realized, Sarah, filled with joy, still suggested her doubt was understandable, Genesis 21 verses 6 to 7. Her burial site in Hebron, Genesis 23, served as a testament to Abraham's faith that God would also fulfill his promise regarding the land. Abraham, who lived during the early 2nd millennium BCE, was the first of the Hebrew patriarchs and is venerated by the three major monotheistic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. According to the Bible's Genesis, Abraham left Ur in Mesopotamia after God called him to establish a new nation in an unspecified land, which he later discovered to be Canaan. He faithfully followed God's commands, receiving promises and a covenant that his descendants would inherit the land. In Judaism, the promised descendants are seen as the Jewish people, who trace their lineage to Isaac, Abraham's son, with his wife Sarah. In Christianity, Jesus' genealogy is linked to Isaac, and the near sacrifice of Isaac is interpreted as a foreshadowing of Jesus' own sacrifice on the cross. In Islam, however, it is Ishmael, Abraham's first son with Hagar, who is considered the fulfillment of God's promise, and the Prophet Muhammad is believed to be his descendant. A traditional biography of Abraham is not possible in the usual sense. Instead, scholars can use modern historical findings to interpret biblical texts and form a likely understanding of the context and events of his life. This involves reconstructing the patriarchal period, which includes Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, during the early 2nd millennium BCE. Prior to the late 19th century, this era was largely unknown and considered beyond reach. It was assumed that the patriarchal stories in the Bible were projections of later periods, 9th to 5th century BCE, and lacked historical validity. Various theories have been proposed to explain the biblical narratives, such as the idea that the patriarchs were mythical figures, symbolic representations of tribes, or folkloric characters created to explain social, legal, or religious practices. However, after World War I, archaeological discoveries, such as the excavation of a royal palace at Mari on the Euphrates, unearthed thousands of cuneiform tablets that provided new insight. These texts, many from the same time period traditionally assigned to the patriarchs, showed that the biblical accounts in Genesis align well with the historical context of the early 2nd millennium BCE, rather than a later period. This shift in understanding was referred to by a biblical scholar in the 1940s as the rediscovery of the Old Testament. Thus, two primary sources are used to reconstruct the life of Abraham. The book of Genesis, which covers his genealogy from Terah, his father, and his journey from Ur to Haran in chapter 11 to his death in chapter 25, and recent archaeological findings that shed light on the region and time period of the biblical narrative. According to the biblical narrative, Abram, meaning the father or God, is exalted, who is later renamed Abraham, meaning the father of many nations, is originally from Ur in Mesopotamia. God, Yahweh, calls him to leave his homeland and people and journey to an unspecified land, where he is destined to become the founder of a new nation. Without hesitation, Abram follows God's command, and at the age of 75, he sets out with his wife Sarai, later named Sarah, meaning princess, his nephew Lot, and other companions toward the land of Canaan, situated between Syria and Egypt. In the biblical account, the childless septuagenarian Abraham receives repeated promises and a covenant from God, assuring him that his descendants will inherit the land and become a great nation. Despite his old age, Abraham has a son, Ishmael, through his wife Sarah's maidservant Hagar. However, at the age of 100, he fathers a legitimate son, Isaac, with Sarah, who is to be the heir of God's promise. When God commands Abraham to sacrifice Isaac as a test of faith, Abraham is willing to obey, but God intervenes and provides a ram as a substitute. After Sarah's death, Abraham purchases the cave of Machpelah near Hebron as a burial site, marking the first clear ownership of land in the Promised Territory for Abraham and his descendants. Near the end of his life, Abraham ensures that Isaac marries a woman from his own people in Mesopotamia rather than a Canaanite woman. Abraham dies at 175 and is buried beside Sarah in the cave of Machpelah. Abraham is depicted with a range of characteristics: a righteous man deeply committed to God, a man of peace, resolving a boundary dispute with his nephew Lot, compassionate, as he bargains with God to save the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, hospitable, when he welcomes 3 visiting angels, a decisive warrior, rescuing Lot and his family from a raiding group, and, at times, an unscrupulous liar, passing off Sarah as his sister to protect himself, which leads her being taken by the Egyptian Pharaoh for his harem. Abraham is portrayed as a man of profound spiritual strength and depth, yet one who also displays common human flaws and vulnerabilities. The discovery of thousands of tablets in the palace at Mari has revealed many surprising details, including references to the Apiru, Hebrews, and, remarkably, the Banu Yamina, Benjaminites. While these Benjaminites are not necessarily the direct ancestors of the biblical Benjamin, the name appears in these extra-biblical sources from the 18th century BCE. It is clear that the Benjaminites, or Yamanites, meaning sons of the right or sons of the south, likely referring to their orientation, are located north of Mari and in Haran, particularly in the Temple of Sin. The Bible does not provide details on the specific route taken between Ur and Haran. Scholars speculate that the caravan traveled up the Euphrates River and then up the Balik River. After an indeterminate stay in Haran, the Bible notes that Terah died there at the age of 205, and that Abraham was 75 when he resumed the journey with his family and belongings. This migration continued westward, likely crossing the Euphrates River at Carchemish, which could be forded during low water periods. The Mari texts again offer useful information, noting the presence of Benjaminites on the right bank of the river, in regions such as Yamhad, Aleppo, Katna, and Amuru. Ancient trade routes were often marked by sanctuaries, and it is significant that Nayrab, near Aleppo, was a center for the Sin cult, similar to Haran and Ur. A village south of Aleppo on the road to him still bears the name of Benjamin, further aligning with the route to the land of Canaan, the journey's destination. If the caravan passed through Damascus, it would have crossed the land of Bashan, modern Orne, crossing the Jabbok River and then the Jordan River at the Demia Ford. This would have brought them to the heart of the Samaritan region, finally reaching the plain of Shechem, modern Bala, located at the foot of Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. During this time, Shechem was a major political and religious center, with archaeological evidence confirming its significance. Excavations show that from the mid-13th to mid-11th centuries BCE, Shechem was a site of the cult of Baal-Berit, Lord of the Covenant. The architectural finds at the site, dating back to the 18th century BCE, support the biblical claim that the patriarchs passed through Shechem.